I welcome you to this online webinar, the second online webinar we are organizing in collaboration with the African Gong Network. I will be handing over momentarily to my colleague, Elizabeth Rasikwala, who will be the moderator and our first speaker. She will introduce the session and our esteemed speakers and leading the Q&A at the end. So with that, I will leave the floor to my colleague, Elizabeth. Please, Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Well, I hope, depending on what time slot it is where you are, I'm really delighted on behalf of Names and African Gong to invite you to this second webinar in this collaborative partnership series between Names and African Gong, where we're really trying to break certain barriers in terms of enhancing the visibility, the voice, the perspectives, and the contributions of science communication practitioners, researchers, and academics from the global south, so that we actually achieve a really globally inclusive scenario in the field. We're delighted in this second webinar to be bringing on board another science communication network from the global south, which is ASPAC. In the previous webinar, we brought on board Red Pop, which is the science communication network for Latin America and the Caribbean. And so without further ado, I would like to say welcome. Great to have you on board. We have, in addition to myself, we have Professor Nidal Geshem, we have Dr. Rejoice Gavi Mulefe, and we have Persier Desierdo from the Philippines. Dr. Rejoice is based in South Africa, and Professor Nidal is based in the UAE. So here we go, and we hope that you will get a real sense of shared learnings, mutual understandings, and synergies across the global north and south, so that we move together collaboratively. Thank you. Hello again. This is me with my speaker's hat on. And my topic really is to shed light on how we can leverage Afrocentricity and sociocultural inclusion to enhance the impact of science communication in across the African continent when we're talking about the advancement of science engagement through challenging times. And boy, have we had some recently challenging times. And I've just put on this slide the new book, Race and Sociocultural Inclusion in Science Communication, Innovation, Decolonization, and Transformation, where you can find much deeper reading, much more references, and much more globally orientated contributions to these discussions as a resource. When we talk about Afrocentric science communication in practice in the African continent, what do we actually mean? So, first of all, what do we mean by the concept of Afrocentricity? Afrocentricity was a concept that was introduced by the African American scholar in 2007, Dr. Molefe Asante. And Molefe's premise for really bringing on board Afrocentricity was to drive and transform a number of critical paradigms across sociocultural, economic, political developments, not just on the African continent, but also within the African diaspora. The first point was about African thought, philosophy, values, and experience, bringing those to the fore. Afrocentric priorities, cultural, political, and economic. How do we foreground those Afrocentric priorities? And all of this proceeds from the premise that everything has context. The African context is unique, it's real, It has strengths, it has opportunities, it has challenges. How do we bring those to the conversation? And it also addresses the critical dimension that the exclusion of Africans from their own narratives constitutes intellectual and cultural terrorism. That exclusion is a critical part of what undermines globally inclusive paradigms in science communication. And the irony is that on the African continent, we're actually very good because we are forced to deliver Afrocentric science communication when there is a crisis. And a recent example of that was the Ebola virus outbreak that affected several countries in West Africa between 2014 and 2016 and created challenges for African practitioners who realized that their Western derived approaches were not only ineffective, but they were actually creating added disenchantment with the African citizens who thoroughly did not want to go through those Western derived processes. And they were only able to effect change in the social behavior of Africans to accept this scientific advice when they went through and channeled that scientific advice through traditional sociocultural frameworks that people valued and recognized. Equitable partnerships with community leaders, partnerships with African traditional communicators, the griots, through music, through African traditions, centuries old of storytelling. So we are actually quite good at doing this when there's a crisis. The problem is doing it as a routine to systematically transform science communication on our continent. What are the key elements that need to feature in this transformed landscape? Sociocultural inclusion, mainstreaming African culture and contexts, science outreach and indigenous knowledge. How do we bring our traditional knowledge to this space and give it equity and give it visibility to empower and inspire our people? Scientific literacy. What kind of scientific literacy do we want to achieve given the differential and in some cases poor levels of basic science education in our school system? Scientific culture and African innovation. Whose perspectives, whose values drive scientific and innovation in the African continent? And how do we center African values in that? African languages inclusion. How do we move beyond the dominance of the legacy of European colonial languages to mainstream African languages in science communication on our continent, which has a much wider reach and a deeper reach in terms of enrichment and enrollment with African publics? Public engagement strategies, which are now being recommended as a way of moving forward from that sort of Eurocentric dominant deficit model as a way forward on our continent, again, to enhance the reach and the transformative impact of science communication. Societal literacy, which we in African Gong have been advocating as a two-way approach between African scientists and publics, so that we actually create added value dimensions to science communication on the continent, such as increased civic citizenship and social cohesion across African communities. Another critical aspect of some of the unique contexts on our continent that need to be addressed. So, having put all this out there as what we need to be doing, we then come across the critical issue of how do we do it and what are the barriers? The first barrier is that of policy making, implementation, and resourcing, which we very much handled and elaborated on and discussed in the first webinar at the end of September, bringing on board perspectives and contexts from other parts of the global south. The second aspect to this, to the how do we do it, is the critical challenge of capacity building. How do we capacity build African scientists, researchers, practitioners, science communicators, so that they are really embedded and centered and skilled and abled to be able to deliver Afrocentric science communication on our continent? How do we enable them to take off the shackles of Eurocentric dominance in their practice, in their mindsets, so that they become real embedded practitioners of transformative Afrocentric science communication on our continent? And that challenge is across the young, emerging, and senior age track in all these different aspects of the continent. And this critical second aspect is one which one of our speakers, Dr. Rejoice Gavi Mulefe, will be talking about in much more detail and showcasing the transformational good practice in partnership with African Gong that has been delivered in her institution since 2020. And so, with those, with this short presentation and this short outline, I hope that we can begin to get a sense of the transferability of what we're talking about in Afrocentricity. Many of these elements apply to other regions of the global south, apply to regions such as Latin America and the Caribbean, where you have a large African diaspora. It also applies to regions in South Asia that are also coming up with their own unique conceptualization of what these kinds of critical contextual issues mean, whatever different names you want to call them. But there is a growing articulation across different parts of the global south now that we need to be able to frame and articulate contextually based, culturally based understandings of what different aspects, different fields of development should mean in our region, defined by ourselves, conceptualized by ourselves as means of seriously moving beyond words to actions of overturning Eurocentric dominance. So, Afrocentricity is just one of those exemplars. And if you want to know more about other concepts from different parts of the world, again, some of those are articulated in the book, Race and Sociocultural Inclusion in Science Communication. Thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Nidal Geshem, who is going to be talking about scientific literacy and scientific culture. Over to you, Professor Nidal.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mesa, for inviting me to take part in this very important discussion pertaining to the science engagement in different parts of the world. As you just pointed out, my discussion will be about science literacy and scientific culture, more particularly in the Arab Muslim world. I don't think I need to spend too much time explaining to this group and this audience the importance of science literacy today. We know from the pandemic in particular the importance of understanding viruses, bacteria, vaccines, antibiotics, contraceptives in many parts of the developing world, in particular, the importance of science literacy pertaining to foods, diets, organic additives, vitamins, drinks with high calorie and high caffeine sometimes that can be very dangerous to youngsters, the environment, today here opens in the United Arab Emirates COP28. And so we are in so much need to discuss what can be and must be done regarding the change in the climate globally and locally. And of course, we have been submerged with discussions of artificial intelligence, new tools, new products, new jobs, and so forth. It is also important to understand why we, as a culture in general, as a society, as a humanity, as individuals and groups, we need to have a scientific culture. It is important to understand what scientific information is, how valid it is, how to sift and filter information when it comes to us, how arguments can be assessed for validity and importance, and to be able to distinguish proper science and proper scientific information from pseudoscience, which has grown and multiplied in recent years, and people have been lost between what is valid science and what is pseudoscience. It is also important to develop some understanding of probabilities and statistics, because so much information around the world comes to us in the form of statistics, and some assessments are done in probabilistic terms. And last but not least, it is important to distinguish science from technology and to understand how each affects our world and shapes it. With this, now how do we know how much science literacy and scientific culture there is in the world, and how much work we, people of science, let's call ourselves, people who do science, people who communicate science, people who engage in science, how much work we still have to do around the world. This on the slide, as you can see, is data from 2018. This is from the United States Science and Engineering Indicators, which tends to relate information about the US in global context, so it compares the US with the rest of the world. Every 3 years, a report is issued such as this. It's a very, very thick report. And as part of the report, there is some information about scientific literacy, which comes in the form of a survey or questionnaire that is done or presented to people around the world from the age of 18 and up. They don't have to be scientists, they don't have to be professionals, they don't have to be science related. They just have had some education all the way to the age of 18 and beyond. And they are asked 10 questions that have to do with scientific information about the world. And then we gauge how many are answering those questions right. And this on the slide, what you see is the average of the people in different parts of the world who have answered some or all of these questions right. So you can see 72% in Canada, and the lowest among the participating countries was Russia with 33%. I note, for example, that from the south, quote unquote, we can see India and Malaysia, and they're both at about 45 or 46%, which is not very encouraging, but it just tells us that we have some work to do. And so myself and the group of colleagues, we set out to try to do something. That was around the year of 2019, 2020, and just as we readied a survey to be conducted in the Arab Muslim world, the pandemic hit us, and so we were not able to conduct it in person. Still, we did not want to be stopped and discouraged. We ran an online survey among more than 3,000 participants, most of them from the Arab world and Pakistan, but with a number of participants from elsewhere. And so we had 10 questions regarding science literacy, which is facts that people should know from science, 11 questions on attitudes towards science, and 7 questions on people's understanding of the nature of science. So I just want to give you just a few examples. I cannot show you the entire thing in this very short and brief presentation and report from me, but just a few examples to give you an idea of what kind of questions were asked. Among the 28 questions, some of them were factual science literacy, such as what is the age of the Earth? Is it roughly 5,000 years, 5 million years, 5 billion years, 13.8 billion years. Of course, the right answer is about 5 billion years. The 13.8 is the age of the universe. Then there were questions that were more socially relevant, such as the sex of a newborn baby, or a boy or girl, is determined by the father's genes, the mother's genes, or the father's and the mother's genes. And this is important because, as you may well be aware, sometimes the mother is blamed for the wrong sex, for giving only girls, or situations like that. Another question is, science brings more to humans than just technology. This gauges people's understanding of science and technology and appreciation of both science and technology. Is science important even without the technology that it brings? Yes or no? And then finally, just another question among the 28, knowledge of what science is, what it can and cannot do, and how it works is important for us all. And people will tell us whether they strongly agree, are not sure, disagree, strongly disagree. In conclusion, from that study and from our ongoing investigations of science literacy and scientific culture in our part of the world, science needs freedom, openness, and diversity. The current political and cultural polarization, dogmatism, and distrust of science is a major cause of concern. This speaks to the title of this webinar, The Challenging Times. We need to find new ways of promoting science literacy and culture, because as you saw from the brief results I showed, and I didn't have a chance to show you the results from our own survey, let's put it succinctly as there is work to be done. We need role models. We need new engagement forms, such as this webinar and others. We need a more holistic understanding of science and so on. We need more comprehensive surveys of science literacy, attitudes, and culture around the world, and better assessment and remedy for what the situation is. With this, I thank you, and I will be more than happy to engage in discussion with you later on any aspects of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nidal, for this excellent presentation, summarizing very quickly key data and exemplars of those challenges of science, culture, and literacy. And I'm particularly excited to see that you decided to undertake specifically research to highlight a critical region in the global south. So thank you very much for that, and the ramifications and implications for different parts of the world, global south vis-a-vis the global north. Thank you for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Rejoice Gavi Mwefe, and her title is Inclusive Science Engagement in South Africa, Challenges, Enablers, and Transformative Good Practices. Over to you, Rejoice.
Thank you very much. First of all, to Maisa and Elizabeth African Gong for the invitation in this important discussion on how we can advance science engagement through challenging times. And I'm so delighted that already Dr. Rasikwala and Professor Nidal have highlighted those challenges that are there in particularly on the African continent, and the opportunities that we have. So as Dr. Rasikwala elaborated already, the challenges are the same on the continent, and what I'm coming here, I'm bringing in this presentation the context of South Africa, and to showcase what we have been doing in terms of addressing one of the critical challenge, which is capacity building. So what is unique about South Africa is that while across the continent there is issue of policy practice gap, motivation of scientists, poor skills, capacity building role models. In South Africa, we have an added dimension which has to do with race, gender and socioeconomic equalities. And this is due to the complex historical legacy of systematic discrimination that has effectively deprived particularly Black South Africans and female citizens from equitable access to science, technology, engineering and mathematics education, skills, profession, and economic resources. So as a society in South Africa, we are actively working very hard to address these historical legacies. And particularly, we are also using science communication, and it's being perceived as one of the tools to redress these inequalities. So in terms of the policies that Dr. Rasikola talked about, South Africa, the policies are there, the science engagement strategies are there, and what we have as a challenge really is we have few capacity building programs or opportunity to equip our scientists to engage with the broader communities. And where I am, I'm working for African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. Here we deal with the postgrad students and researchers who are doing research in mathematics. And one of the things that we find out and we realized was we were sending them to the community to engage. However, we realized that they have technical skills, but then they still lack the skills to really share with the public the beauty of mathematics, the relevance of mathematics, particularly within that Afrocentricity philosophy, as Dr. Rasikola elaborated. So in 2020, we partnered with African Gong, and we partner with African Gong to really equip our students with transformative science engagement skills. And then the program that we partnered with that has been conceptualized by African Gong is called African Scientific. It's about leadership skills and knowledge for science communication. And it has 3 phases where the phase 1, we focus on really getting that message to our students to really what is this science communication is all about and what is the history behind it. And also we bring about the transformational Pan-African context. Why do we do research in Africa and why do we have to communicate better with our African citizen? And then phase 2, it focuses on really intense 3-day where students that are put there, they delve deeper in the science communication. And the most important part is how this science communication, it can engender or it can advance their career progression. So part of the exciting part about this is that this workshop doesn't just finish, we don't just finish with the student and leave them. On the last day, we encourage them to conceptualize a project in which we find that they're excited about it because we are talking about mathematical students who now they have to move from their comfort zone to conceptualize a project on how they can communicate their mathematics in their community. So this is where now they have to reflect on their journey as a mathematician, reflect on their communities, where they come from, and those challenges that they can address using the mathematics knowledge that they have. So within the 6 months, we mentor them to really plan, to deliver, and even to monitor their public engagement activity. So you can see on the photo there, we have 2020 group. We're very small, around 14 students. And then over the years, we got more students. And the photo there in 2023, you can see that the group was very big. So what are the guiding principles behind this Africa Scientific? And already Dr. Rasikola already elaborated on the first and important critical element of this program, or the Afrocentricity as a guiding principle on how it has been designed and how it has been we plan it and organize and deliver it. So that has been one of the unique principle that we put in this program. And the second one is learn by doing, which we think is critical, especially for our young people. If we're talking about science communication, we give them an opportunity to really, throughout the workshop, to learn, and over the over the post workshop, to really be part of the process. And you can see there the different pictures that tells you have a facilitator support, you have them working in a groups where they learn from each other. And you can see also they had all of them, they have an opportunity to go in front and really present over the 3 days. And then, so transformation is a sustainable impact. And as Dr. Rasikola said, we it's important that we focus on young people, although the challenge is in both young and old, but young people, they still have a long career journey. And if we can equip them with these skills at a young age, we have a chance really to grow that critical mass of science communicators that we need on the continent. And gender equality and inclusion. So this is also critical elements of our program, where we are saying, if we are talking about mathematics as a discipline, already is under this under representation of women. So this is another way for us to really also equip both male and female, and the issue of the importance of gender equality. And we also deliver this through our program, where we make sure that that distribution of gender and even the opportunities during the workshop and the program is met. And the participation, the geography is quite interesting. We focus on Pan-African. You can see different countries where the students are from. And one of the key elements, the final elements about excellent awards, here is the recognition to say those who improve over the program, they get certificates and awards. So what has been the output or outcome for our program is, I'll give you just a key example of 2 projects where the students on 3 days, 2 students, Cebo and Tandy, were from Swaziland. They conceptualized their project, presented it in one slide, and then as a post project, they have to design the poster, and that tool, they have to identify the community. And then you can see the first one is Cebo in the taxi rank, where he was saying the issue there is that taxi drivers, they use GPS, but then he wanted to teach them that mathematics can do more in terms of helping them how to navigate from one town to another. And the second one is Tandy, where they're presenting about vaccination lottery, and then she was doing it in a church. So in a nutshell, so the program that we are having here at AIMS in partnership with African Gong over the 4 years, really, we have seen that impact. We have seen that motivation coming from our graduate students, where now they go out there, they do outreach, and also how they testify on how these skills are helping them in their career, whether they're in industry or in academia. So that's I'll leave it there, and then thank you so much. If you want to learn more about the testimony, more about the program, I will share this on the chat box soon. And then we also highlighted this program in the recent book that Dr. Rasikwala already shared on race and cultural inclusion in SciComm. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rejoice, for that excellent outline of the benefits, impacts of the Africa Scientific Leadership, Knowledge and Skills for Science Communication Program in AIMS that has been taking place over the last 4 years. I'm sure that there are many transferable lessons and elements that colleagues from other parts of the global South and North can learn from some of the very unique good practice elements of your program. Thank you so much for that. Our final speaker is Persier Desierdo, and his topic is on Mind School, sharing the Science Museum experience through TV and online. So over to you, Persier.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time you have there in the part of the world you're watching this from. My name is Pisher Desharda, and I'm from the Mine Museum, a museum in Manila, Philippines. And I'll be sharing our experience in Mind School, where we share the experience of the museum for TV and online. So, just a brief introduction. The organization that runs the Mine Museum is called the Bonifacio Art Foundation. It has four major projects. This includes the Mine Museum, the BGC Art Center, the art in the area where we are called BGC, and Mind School. So the Mine Museum is a science museum here in Manila where we aim to use the arts to further the cause of science communication and to bolster scientific literacy and science engagement in the country. A country, by the way, of 100 million people and count and growing. And then, of course, another of the major projects, the project that we'll be talking about, is called Mind is School. Mind School is a 30-minute science TV program that we here in the Mind Museum are writing, producing, and we air it with different partners. And I'll talk more about the characters and the story and the narrative in a little while. All right, so how did the Mind Museum come about? Like many of the things we've discussed here from the excellent speakers that came before me, Mind This School, the TV show, came about through challenging times. It came about as our response here at the Mind Museum for the challenges that arose. And that challenge being one of the longest lockdowns in the world here in the Philippines, with no end in sight to the lockdowns and no sharp response to the pandemic. Or the we here in the Mind Museum have decided to go for a way to continue and further our aims while the Philippines was still in lockdown during the pandemic. And so we went with TV. So why TV, right? In an age where there's already the internet, why did we go with TV? So in the Philippines, there is still very much low internet access, right? Not a lot of people have access to the internet, but still 96% of Filipinos ages 10 to 64, which is a large portion of the Philippine population, watches TV. So that in terms of access, TV is free. TV is more egalitarian. It's more culturally relevant to most Filipinos. Access was very important to us. And even in our online show, right, that we aired and produced during the pandemic, we saw that it did not have a deep reach. It didn't have a wide reach among Filipinos. So with that, we had to partner with others in order to distribute it, such as, for example, through USB flash drives. All right. So, how does one create an educational TV show with a little experience in TV production, which was for us here in the Mind Museum? We were a science museum where we're used with our science communication being face to face through live science shows and events that are on site and face to face. So, what we did was we partnered, of course, with a lot of institutions, partners that would share with us resources, both monetary resources and resources in terms of knowledge and expertise. And with the help of these partners, we were able to um, create and write our TV show. But in writing the TV show, again, this is another challenge for us because being a science museum, we're used to our science communication being like on site, and we could easily and immediately measure the impact of our science communication. But this is a very, very different thing altogether. And so here we had to tap into the power of storytelling and narrative. And we had to learn how to write with story arcs in mind, and not just story arcs. So as we were writing the episodes and we were beginning to air the first few episodes of our first season, of our pilot season during the height of the lockdowns and the pandemic here in the Philippines, we were looking at how the audience interacted with the episodes, like how many people stayed for out the whole 20 minutes or 30 minutes, how many stayed from one commercial to the other, how many stayed throughout the entire season. And so we had to learn how to write episodes with compelling narratives that would encourage the viewers to finish the entire episode and watch into the entire season. But even for those who would not watch the entire episode, we would also write the segments, each segment from one commercial to another, or from the start to the first commercial. We would give them full story arcs so that people who would be only able to see that segment of the episode would get lessons already, would get accurate scientific information presented in a compelling way. So segment, complete science already, complete story arc. Episode, complete story arc. But we also wrote it in such a way that all the episodes connected to each other in a way that hangs together so that the all the episodes are greater than the sum of its parts, right? The season as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And those who are compelled to watch the entire season are able to understand something more and have a more compelling narrative, right? We also took advantage during the lockdown of the museum's assets. This include the physical assets in the museum, which we could use as a setting for a TV shoot, as well as, of course, our expertise in science communication, performing demonstrations, and so on. But one of the challenges that we faced, an additional challenge, was trying to minimize the exposure of the team when we were shooting during the pandemic. So here, we came up with a solution of using green screens to enhance our storytelling method. So it was a two-in-one kind of thing, wherein we were able to tell many unique stories thanks to the power of this technology, but we were also able to minimize the risk for the team during the pandemic. All right, so what is the impact of Mind School to the community? Right, so we're happy to share that the first 5 seasons of our TV show has reached 11 million views, confirming our hunch that in the 21st century here in the Philippines, TV is still something that would be more culturally impactful and has a wider reach for Filipinos. Another thing that we realized in looking at the data over the seasons is that there was a large portion of our viewers that were co-viewers. The co-viewership was very high. And what that means is that the viewers were across multiple generations. Families of 5, 6, 7, 8 would view all together. The children, the parents, the grandparents would view it all together. And so we had to be aware of that. And in fact, before I end, I'm going to show one of the characters that you might have seen earlier. I'm going to share it. There you go. So he's a puppet. He's one of the characters in the TV show. And we call him Manong Guard, or Manong G for short. He is a security guard. And we came up with using a security guard as one of the characters is in fact the central character for our TV show because of the cultural significance of security guards in Philippine culture, which takes a long time to explain. But when you're Filipino, you immediately know what the cultural role of security guards are in Filipino society as guardians of a building, as people who keep a community safe, and as someone who knows the ins and outs of everyone who lives in a certain area. And we've seen the impact of our efforts in using these narrative tools and the tools of characterization and metaphor in furthering our goals of science communication to our 11 million and counting viewers. This is just for the first 5 seasons, but of course, we've already had a sixth season this year. Right. So I'm happy to share all of that, and I hope that that inspired you to think about how perhaps the lessons that we've had can be applied to your particular context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Persia, for that very interesting presentation. While you were talking, I was thinking of the African analogy to the security guard in our communities. And I was thinking of that old auntie, the local gossip who knows more about everybody else's business than hers. And she's the fountain of wisdom, and she knows everything going on. So I could just see those social-cultural transfers. So thank you so much for that. That was very, very illuminating. Now, thank you so much to our three speakers who have come up with some very excellent globally enriching perspectives. I have some questions, one question for each of you. And I'll start off with Professor Nidal. Professor Nidal, I was very, very struck in your presentation by one sort of context, which is how do we actually know that the elements of scientific literacy or culture that are used in these tests, how do we actually make them socioculturally relevant and enriching? Because I worry sometimes that we simply transpose similar kind of senses of what is scientific literacy from the global north and parts of the global south. So I was just intrigued. Maybe the word is, I was just intrigued by some of the questions in your survey in the Arab world as to whether how socioculturally did you actually tweak those?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yes, that is a definite issue to be addressed whenever we do surveys, locally, regionally, globally. Do we want to have a common denominator, or do we want to go more socially, as you said, socially and culturally relevant and impactful? We tried to do both if that was possible, although difficult, because on the one hand, we do have these international surveys that have been conducted with the same set of questions applied to everywhere. And we wanted to be able to compare, because as I showed in those surveys that have been going on for about 20 years now, every 3 years, same questions everywhere in the world. There is not a single Arab country and only one Muslim majority country, and that was Malaysia. So we wanted to be able to at least compare on the same grounds, whether we like those questions or not. Those are the questions that are used internationally. Let's see how we compare. But at the same time, we did not just take those questions and implement them. We took only a subset, those that we think are indeed core to science and have no social or cultural relationship. But there were some other questions that we wanted to see in our part of the world, how people relate to science from their context, from their history, from their language. I did not have a chance to also address the issue of language, which was one item that we tried to explore, because our survey was conducted in Arabic, in Urdu, in English, and we tried to also do it even in Turkish, but we could not, because we wanted to know if the kids and students here in our part of the world who study science, sometimes in their native language, but very often they study it in French or in English. We wanted to see if there is any difference in the way they understand science and respond to science when they have studied in English or when they have studied in their mother tongue. So we did try to explore those socio-cultural aspects, but we wanted also to have at least some part of the survey that could be compared with other surveys internationally to see to what extent we are similar or different.
Thank you so much, Professor Nidal. That's really useful. Then I have a question for you, Dr. Rejoice. And listening to your presentation, I was very struck by the fact that there must have been some very critical South African and African sort of contextualized pinpoints for your students, you know, the real, some of the real hard challenges that they had to overcome, mindset wise, social-cultural wise, to actually make that journey through this program. Can you just speak on, in the interest of time, just one critical pinch point that your students had to overcome to make the transition?
Thank you very much for that interesting question, Dr. Rasikwala. And the one point that I could see, especially from mathematics background myself, was that the realization of the skill set that if one can have and if one can have, you can actually impact the community with the maths you have. And I remember one of the quotes of one student that I didn't manage to go through was when they said every social problem is a mathematical solution which can communicate and implement. And the highlight there was with these students having mathematics, what ways that confidence to communicate that into their communities. That really stuck me, particularly when they realized that where they're sitting there, this problem here, they're sitting with the knowledge, the confidence, the skill set that they need to really go back there in the communities.
Thank you so much for that illuminating answer, Dr. Rejoice. So, last question to you, Persier. I was very struck by the narrative arc and storytelling elements that you're trying to bring. And as I said, the security guard and our anti analogy here. So, within that context, again, how were you able to pull in critical elements of your local sociocultural, indigenous knowledge, indigenous myths and stories? Were you able to bring that into Mind School?
Yeah, thank you for that excellent question. And yes, I think the analogy between the security guard and the auntie is a really excellent one. That's exactly a very good analogy. When it comes to indigenous knowledge, yes, we were able to tap into a network. So I showed earlier some of our partners, and some of them have connections with the many indigenous groups in the Philippines. And we were able to share some of the links between the science that we're telling and the indigenous knowledge systems of various groups in the Philippines. In particular, I'll like to give one specific example. We had an episode wherein we asked, "Sino ba talaga tayo? Who are we?" And then we started with making the audience think about the fact that when Filipinos are asked about themselves, to describe themselves, one of the first thing they describe is where they are from. And therefore, our identity is tied to our sense of place. And then we link that with the fact that with the disappearance of languages in the Philippines, there's also disappearance of biodiversity and vice versa. That the disappearance of biodiversity and the disappearance of language diversity go hand in hand, right? And we have people connected to the indigenous groups here in the Philippines to share that. And so we made them realize that protecting indigenous knowledge systems in the Philippines and protecting biodiversity really do go hand in hand. So that's one particular example wherein we used our very specific cultural context here in the Philippines with the science that we were trying to communicate.
Thank you so much for that, Persier. And I think we have just a little bit of time. And I just thought I would give each of you just 1 minute just for a last
Yeah. Yeah.
How are we doing, Maisa? Are we
Yeah.
out of time?
Now we have a question
Wait,
I want. So I will show it on the stage. You can see it and you
so we
can.
have a question. Okay, yeah.
There is another one. I think it may be a continuation. So you can read it and I can also share the other one.
Okay, so yeah, Dr. Rejoice, do you want to quickly take the first one? Because I thought that was relating more to yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. The question is, how do we see the future of science engagement? Right? Is that the one you're
No, I
talking
think
about?
the first one is what are the challenges to science engagement in today's world? Misinformation and distrust of science, and the social and political polarization of science.
Okay. Yes, I'll quickly go answer to that within the context that I'm talking about. And the one critical one that we talked about in the continent, it's about growing that critical mass. And this also linked to the enabler who have to now go to the communities and really address this misinformation, the distrust amongst the society. So we need to really grow that critical mass, and then we need to do it because most university, they are not providing those training for our students.
Professor Neil, do you want to quickly add to that, please? This is
Very quickly,
question
I
one
think there
now.
are two issues that have been raised by this question. One is, why is science not accepted easily? Why is there distrust of science and scientists? Why is there a mixing of the science with the politics or political trends? Why is there so much disinformation? And I think there are two issues here. One is, how is science being explained and taught to people? And unfortunately, it is very often taught in a completely disconnected way from their world and their lives and their realities and their history and their culture and their language. And so for them, it is just another field, something very different that they have to take in school. And so for them, it is a strange thing. Very often, they see some people whom they don't relate to. This is why I mentioned role models and the necessity of local role models that they identify with and understand. So there is a whole rethinking of how we present science, both in schools and in the media. The other issue is the problem of disinformation, which is broader than the problem of just science. There is so much disinformation that is very quickly spread nowadays using digital media, using WhatsApp, and things like that, where something that is striking, very surprising, and is going to catch fire, so to speak, and spread quickly, is shared and it goes around. And that's where we get misinformation regarding disease, regarding vaccines, regarding even flat earth and things that we thought we had completely overcome and completely passed, but now are coming back because there is this method of spreading this kind of information that is too easy and too quick. And if we do not teach people how to filter correct information from disinformation, science from pseudoscience, then this is actually going to grow, and science will just be regarded as some tool of disinformation that is taken by the powers that be.
Thank you so much for that powerful response, Professor Nida, and a really powerful advocacy for addressing some of these entrenched inequalities that actually amplify and make the problem worse. Okay, just 1 minute to you, Persia, to answer question 2, and that is really how do we see the future of science engagement in helping us to address global challenges?
I think one way that science engagement can really move forward into the future is through a diversity of approaches, which we've seen and heard here
Yeah.
from various speakers and from many of the efforts that were alluded to and mentioned. We need people in science engagement who are telling compelling stories of science and inoculating, as we've seen, which is effective, inoculating the public against misinformation and disinformation by preemptively giving them the tools to know accurate information versus disinformation or misinformation, or like other forms of inaccuracies in social media and in media in general. That's what I really see. People working in on TikTok, people working on YouTube, people working on Facebook, people working on TV and traditional media, so-called, people working on face-to-face means of science communication, and people in the formal science education system using all the tools of science communication to enhance science, basic science education from the start of the formal schooling up to the PhD level. We must use the professors there, the teachers must use all the tools of science engagement to enhance formal science education as well. So we need a diversity of approaches. That's what I see moving forward in the future.
Thank you so much for that, Persia. And really, I would just like to add that we cannot give the public what we don't have as a field. And part of the problem in addressing these challenges within the public is that we, as a science communication field, need to start from looking within our own selves as a field to say, how well are we doing in addressing these inequalities so that we can actually do a better job of addressing those issues out there. So I think part of the answer to this question is we need to start to look within ourselves rather than just finger pointing about issues of public trust. We ourselves need to start as a field to challenge ourselves, to question ourselves. What does excellence mean in our field? Like I said in another presentation, if it is not inclusive, do we have the courage to hold each other to account and say it's rubbish? Is everything that we do excellent? And if it isn't, do we have the accountability to hold each other and say, that's not good enough? You can do better. We can do better. So again, I think it really starts from us, not just interrogating what is out there with the public. And it's a partnership. So I'd really like to close here and say thank you to all our speakers for very engaging presentations, for bringing us new thoughts, perspectives, ideas, and more importantly, problem solving, giving us exemplars of how things can be different, showing us a new way of doing things and how we can move forward, and using research tools, survey tools, capacity building programs, innovation on TV, storytelling, bringing on board societal context and values. So across our speakers, I think we have provided a very rich um, sense of how we can address and advance science communication in challenging times. But more importantly, what we have shown is that what we are able to do in challenging times, we need to take that as a routine. We can't just do excellence and transformation when there's a crisis like Ebola or COVID. This needs to be systematic. Are you with me? What Persia is doing with Mind School should be systematic. It shouldn't have waited for COVID, but well, COVID came and you make a move. Dr. Rejoice, Africa Scientific should be a routine. And Professor Nidal, mainstreaming those surveys should be a routine. So challenging times are all well and good for us to innovate and lift our game, but then we need to mainstream and sustain. And therein lies a whole other challenge. But thank you so much to all our speakers and our contributors. Last word from you, Maisa, please, before we go.
Yeah, I would also like to thank everyone for joining us online today. And this has been very informative, and we hope that we continue our series about science engagement from the perspective of the global south. So we look forward to more of these webinars and to more contributions from all of you. Your contributions are much valued, and the recording will be available on our website and on YouTube within a few days. We will send a notification to all the attendees and to all those who registered but couldn't be online, and to others who sent to me, and I'm sure also to Elizabeth, who were very interested, but because of the timing, so they are all looking forward to the recording. So this recording would be very important to share and very valuable. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Nidal, Dr. Rejoice, Piché, I hope I say your name correctly, and of course, Elizabeth, as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, folks. Bye.